everyone, and welcome to our first Feliciano conversation ever. Really big, exciting deal here. I'm very excited about it. And we have two faculty members here with us today. We have Dr. David Axelrod, who received his PhD in economics from Rutgers University. His research included health economics and the role of time and mind in economics. After 20 years working in the finance sector, he started full-time as an instructional specialist at Montclair State University. We also have Mr. Todd Federman, who joined MSU after 25 years on Wall Street, now a full-time instructional specialist in the economics department, teaching macro and microeconomics. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you for having us.
Today, what we'll be discussing is the economic policies between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. We're going to be presenting the pros and the cons of each side along 5 different topics within the economy. So are both of you ready? We'll just get right into it, get started.
We're ready.
So first, before we get started with our 5 different topics, we're going to be giving a little snapshot for everybody who doesn't really know everything about the economy. This way we give a little 101 class, if you don't mind. I'm making you guys work overtime this week, if that's okay.
All righty, Louis, I'm going to share my screen. So what do we mean when we talk about the economy? When David and I will be talking about the economy, what we're really thinking about is something called the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product, the word gross means total. The word domestic means made here in the United States. And the word product means final goods and services. What's the total value of all the goods and services that get made here in the United States? And the reason why it's important is because people get employed to make these goods and services. And we only, by the way, look at final goods and services. In other words, when you buy a car, the value of the steel that got put into that car is included in the price of the car. So we only count final products. There are 2 really good publications that I've loaded up for you on the web that really explain what the gross domestic product is and the federal budget in really, really simple terms. So the first one is cbo.gov. We're going to look at, this is an infographic. This infographic explains the federal budget, which is what we're talking about today. Fiscal year 2019, which by the way, the fiscal year ends September 30th for the federal government. So in the year ended 2019, September, the revenues, the money that went into the government was 3.5 trillion, which consisted mostly of income taxes, Social Security taxes, and then some business taxes and some other excise taxes. Where'd the money go? The outlays were 4.4 trillion. So the first thing you notice is we had a $900 billion deficit. Mandatory are things that are by law required to be paid. Things like Social Security payments, Medicare payments, interest on the debt. Discretionary are things that are not required by law. Basically things like the entire budget for the federal government, for the FBI, for things like running Congress, other discretionary expenses. The military is technically discretionary. Scrolling down, we see where's the money come from? The revenues consist of mostly payroll taxes and individual income taxes. What are payroll taxes? Those are your Social Security taxes. In addition, you notice there's a small slice here for corporate income taxes. So it's not a big part of how the money, how the government gets its money, and some other stuff. Where does the money go? Here you see mandatory spending. The biggest pieces are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, other mandatory requirements, and then the discretionary items are relatively small. It's defense spending and everything else that runs the government. This is the Environmental Protection Agency, this is the FBI, everything that the government does in addition to the Justice Department. Second website I want to show you, which is great for reference, this is the US debt clock. What's the difference between debt and deficit? We'll see both of them here in a minute. In the upper left-hand corner, we see the national debt, and this clock is running real time. Currently, it estimates that the United States has $27 trillion in debt. We are spending this year substantially more money than we did last year because of COVID relief. Estimated that we're going to spend $6.2 trillion this year. We're going to take in, and to the right here, U.S. federal tax revenue, $3 trillion. So we're going to take in $3 trillion. We're going to spend $6.2 trillion. which means we're going to run an annual deficit of 3.2 trillion. Deficits are the annual shortfall in the budget. Debt is the accumulated debt of the nation. All right, when you have time, I encourage you to take a look at the site. Also, one other I want to point out, right in the middle, fourth item down, U.S. gross domestic product. The estimate this year for the total value of goods and services that will be produced in this country, $19.6 trillion.
I just like to point out before you, okay, well,
I put it back.
No, it's okay. Since you put up that website though, we went $2 million more in debt in the time that you had that website up. So just pointing out how fast this clock goes, and now we're up 3 million from when you first put up this website.
Right.
So I just want people to understand the magnitude, the amount of money that the government is spending.
Well, one last item, comparing this to the infographic, upper right-hand corner, the top two, income tax revenue. This is this is what you think of as your income tax on your 1040, and payroll tax, Social Security taxes mostly, and some medical taxes as well, but mostly Social Security. So we got 1.5 trillion in income tax revenue, another trillion in payroll taxes for 2.5. Where's the other 500 billion come from? Excise taxes and miscellaneous fees. Okay, now let's get started with our discussion.
And our first topic of this conversation, now that we're getting into it, is tax proposals. And we're talking both corporate and personal income. Now, Dr. Axelrod, we haven't heard from you yet, so would you mind presenting the Trump plan for tax proposals?
Yes, I will. I would like to point out that the topics that we're discussing today, that here at Feliciano, we already have many podcasts on similar topics on the Business Edge and Feliciano Live, and that the faculty have many published articles as well. So the school is a great resource, not just for the classes, but for research. Okay, so what's Trump's approach? Trump's approach is sort of a more classic free market, conservative approach, where he wants to extend tax cuts, right? The understanding is that when businesses have to pay more in taxes, it increases the cost of production, which means the price of goods go up, which means people want to not buy as much, okay? So it discourages investment, it discourages people buying, and so Trump's approach is let's cut the taxes, and that will encourage economic growth. And if we look at what happened with the economy and especially the stock market, since he cut his had the tax cuts back in late 2017, early 2018, there seems to be empirical evidence that it has helped the economy to grow and to lower unemployment, at least until we got hit by the pandemic. So he would like to continue those tax cuts. Okay, and again, the idea is also if you let people and businesses make their own decisions about how they spend their money, they're more likely to be more efficient with it. So it's about trusting the private sector to do a better job than the public sector as well.
Is there any area of concern in that plan as well?
Well, one concern would be if you have the tax cuts, it will lead to a greater deficit. Part of the hope here is that if you have enough of a stimulus and people respond well enough, that the economy will grow sufficiently that maybe we might get some more revenue from the fact that we have a larger economy. On the other hand, if the economy is doing better and you have less unemployment, you have less people in poverty, that can help reduce the cost to government of having to try to support people that are in need.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Federman, could you provide insight on Biden's plan?
All right, first let me give you a summary over here. So what the vice president has suggested are several increases in taxes on wealthier people. He wants to start charging Social Security taxes. Many people don't realize that Social Security, you stop getting charged Social Security when your income is somewhere around 120, 130,000, I don't know the exact number. He only wants to then start charging people who make more than $400,000 a year, which I believe is the top 1%. And he wants to then have Social Security taxes on all income over $400,000 a year. In addition, the tax cut previously cut the top marginal rate for the wealthiest citizens to 37%. He wants to put it back to 39.6, so increasing it by 2.6%. And a very important part of what he wants to do is putting a 15% tax rate on corporate earnings at a minimum. And that's because upwards of 80 or 90 of the 500 largest companies don't pay a penny in taxes at all because of loopholes in the tax code. He also wants to raise the top corporate rate from 21 back up to 28%. One of the reasons, and by the way, all of this will increase revenue by approximately $4 trillion over 10 years. Everyone knows we're in trouble because of the pandemic. Everyone knows we're running these massive deficits now. This will allow the government, but by the way, who will be paying these increased taxes? The people who've benefited the most by the growth in the economy over the last 10 years. People who have large 401k plans have seen them prosper because they own the stock market. He's asking wealthier Americans to chip in a little more to help put the economy back on solid footing. It's estimated that the top 1% of earners in this country will pay more than 75% of these tax increases. This plan is extremely progressive. What does that mean? A progressive tax system is one that charges wealthier people a larger fraction of their earnings in taxes. One of the topics that we teach in my macroeconomics class here at Feliciano is something called marginal propensity to consume. If you have an extra buck, who's more likely to spend it? Well, if you let people who have low incomes keep most of their income, they have no choice, they're going to spend it. Asking the wealthiest to pay an extra few percent on money that they're already probably not spending, and then taking that money and actually having the government spend it will stimulate the economy dramatically. That's one of the thoughts behind this.
So what's something that might hurt Americans due to this plan?
The argument could be that there will be some corporations, because their tax rate's higher, they might be less likely to invest. But if you ask any corporation, are they thinking about doing a project? They're thinking about the gross amount of money they're going to make. We're going to go and invest in this project because we think we're going to earn a profit, and then we'll worry about paying taxes later. So the answer is it could cut back on some investment, but again, it's hard to pinpoint if that's really going to happen.
Thank you, and thank you both for our first topic. We're going to move on to another topic which is very closely related, and that's of the minimum wage. So we just heard from you, Mr. Federman, so let's go back to you, Dr. Axelrod. This time you're going to take Biden's plan. Explain that for me. What is Biden's plan for the minimum wage?
Okay, so Biden's plan, as he's presenting it, is to have a federal minimum wage. We're talking maybe $15 an hour. And to put this in perspective, if you look at Amazon, for example, they start off their workers at a $15 an hour minimum, and they're certainly quite competitive, quite successful. So part of the argument there is, yes, $15 an hour is a big jump from, what some states and what the federal is doing, which is more around, the $8 to $10 an hour.
Right. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. Exactly.
But Biden will argue we're not talking about jumping from $7.25 to $25. We're talking $7.25 to $15. And by the way, $15 an hour at 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week is only $30,000 a year. And as everybody knows, $30,000 a year that's not a whole lot to try to, live on in the world as it is. Okay. In terms of, impact on employment, there seem to be studies that suggest that there's only a modest impact on employment. Part of it has to deal with, again, if people with low incomes have more money, they're going to spend it. They have to spend it. And so if they're spending more, especially if they're doing it quickly, that increases demand for businesses, products, and services, and they in turn will need to hire more people. And so the idea is, okay, we'll raise it. There's the potential for cutting back on unemployment. On the other hand, if enough people are spending, maybe it won't happen at all. And a little historical perspective is that the idea of having a higher low-end wage, you can go back to the private sector in the early 20th century with Henry Ford, when he offered $5 a day wages, which back then was a big deal, $5 a day, so that his workers could actually afford to buy the cars he was manufacturing. Because he recognized if they were buying cars, okay, that enabled him to mass produce, which lowers cost of production. And also it changes the culture so that cars become more embedded in our society. So, the notion of having a higher low-end wage, it's not just a quote unquote socialist idea. It was embraced by some of the important capitalists of the 20th century.
So if we go with Biden's plan, that would be a more than double increase to the federal minimum wage, going from $7.25 to $15.
Right.
Would that not also raise the prices of goods and services?
It probably will raise the prices of the goods and services. Again, it depends on the particular one and how much of the low end workers in terms of wages are part of those prices. The estimates vary, and it depends on how you're modeling it. On the other hand, part of having higher prices encourages businesses to produce and sell more. So there will tend to be a trade-off between having slightly higher prices and having more employment. And if you have to pay slightly higher prices, but you get to work full time instead of not working at all, that's probably a pretty good trade-off.
All right, moving from Joe Biden to Donald Trump, Mr. Federman, what is Trump's plan for the minimum wage?
Donald Trump's plan for the minimum wage is simple. He doesn't want to raise the minimum wage. And there's a lot of support for this, okay, in terms of economic theory and economic things that have been written. First, when you walk into the marketplace, the market wants to set prices for everything, all the goods and services. There's demand for labor and supply of labor. When the government gets involved, it's going to manipulate the marketplace. They want to put an unnaturally high minimum floor price on wages, and it's going to interrupt and disrupt the marketplace. Almost no one today makes minimum wage. There are almost no people who run a household that make minimum wage. Go by any drive-through fast food place. At White Castle here in New Jersey, the minimum starting wage is $11 an hour, and you get free sliders for lunch. Amazon's paying 50. I'm not making that up. It's true. Amazon's paying $15 an hour. The largest employer in the United States is Walmart. I believe the minimum starting wage anywhere for someone who starts day one is $12 an hour. So the market has set a starting wage well above the federal minimum. The difference here is Joe Biden wants to raise it to 15. When you raise the price of anything, as we teach in Economics 101, when you raise the price of anything, people will buy less of it. If you raise the price of wages, businesses will hire fewer workers. So the answer is, if you raise it above what the market has set, places like McDonald's and all the fast food places might hire fewer people, and it might exacerbate and quicken the pace moving towards technology and having workers replaced by robots.
All right. Thank you both for your views on both sides there. Moving on to our next topic. This will be our tariffs and trade segment. So this is a huge topic right now. We've seen the president instill tariffs on numerous countries. So, Mr. Federman, we'll go right back to you, but this time, could you talk about Trump's plan? Will he be continuing what he's been doing?
Right. Listen, let's have a little background over here. For years, China has been abusing intellectual property rights. There have been numerous cases where we have proven in court in World Trade Organization that they have been selling products here in this country even below what it cost them to make. And eventually Trump decided we need to take some action, and he picked tariffs as the way to do it, putting tariffs on many Chinese products that come into this country. Specifically, steel will be one of the items. It's estimated that this raises the tariffs that he's putting on these products raises anywhere from 70 to 80 billion dollars this year, much needed revenue to the government. He specifically targets specific industries that might have been victims of unfair competition from foreign companies. Brookings Institute estimated that the tariff on steel appears to have helped create several thousand jobs in the steel industry by making foreign steel more expensive. It means that U.S. Companies can be more competitive. And in addition, tariffs on washing machines appears to have created as many as 1,800 new jobs for people who make appliances here in this country. So he specifically targeted certain industries, the goal being to try and improve employment for people who make these products specifically here, with the cost being these tariffs, but a benefit again from the tariffs, money that's raised to help lower the deficit.
And moving on to the other plan, Dr. Axelrod, right to you.
Okay, thank you very much. President Biden's approach, which is also supported by many economists, almost all economists and most policymakers, is to minimize the amount of tariffs that we're using. Okay, now there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, when we think about tariffs, it may be presented as a tax on foreign goods. It's sort of like the argument being, oh, we're going to punish China for what they're doing. But the reality is they don't pay the tariffs, right? U.S. citizens pay the tariffs. Okay, so it's not like we're getting money from China from it. Okay, we're going to pay it, and then the money becomes revenue for the government, but we're paying it. China's not paying it. Okay, and as Professor Federman was pointing out, we've got about $80 billion potentially that we're going to be paying extra for this. Tariffs tend to lower GDP. Again, the basic economics. It makes goods and services more expensive, and people will tend to buy less of it and tend to have less employment as well. And some estimates talk about as much of a 0.25% drop in long-run GDP, wages dropping by about 0.6%, and maybe about 180,000 fewer jobs as well. Now, those are not huge numbers, but they don't help. Okay. The other thing about tariffs is that while it can make U.S. companies more competitive, we can look at the history of what companies actually did. So if you go back in the 1980s and looked at how we tried to help the U.S. car companies as Japan was becoming more competitive, and what we found was that they didn't take full advantage of moving ahead. They tended to take a more short-run approach of being able to raise prices, but not necessarily have a more competitive product. And that is one of the concerns of using tariffs as a strategy. It takes away some of the competitive edge that our companies need to deal with in an international market. And so again, even if you're going to talk about free market and competition, tariffs make it less competitive.
All right, so some pros and cons from both sides there. There definitely are arguments for Trump's plan there and Biden's plan as well. Let's move on to our next topic, our second to last topic. And this has been, right before the pandemic, was the biggest story that was going on in the country, and that was the environment. There was a lot of talks about the Green New Deal and the Democratic primaries. Some people praised it, some people opposed it. However, there might be agreement between the two candidates on this one, that they are not a fan of the Green New Deal. So, Mr. Federman, would you present Biden's plan for the environment and infrastructure as well?
Sure. One of the things that Vice President Biden wants to do with the money that he's going to raise by increasing taxes on the wealthy is to spend it to try and get us on a path to net zero emissions by 2050, a much more realistic timeline than the Green New Deal, which I believe wanted to do it in 10 years, 2030. That would simply be too disruptive to the economy. He wants to, we start with the basic assumption. The science is fairly clear. Climate change is happening. The world is hotter than it's ever been, and it keeps getting hotter. We see the excessive weather that we've seen go on, and it's going to get worse. He wants to install 500,000 electrical vehicle charging stations nationwide by 2030. He wants to spend on infrastructure, which means things like bridges, roads, internet access in rural areas, upwards of $2 trillion over 10 years. So we're talking about a couple of $100 billion, $200 billion per year to promote all kinds of renewable energy, things like windmills and solar panels. This will create thousands and thousands of high-paying green energy jobs. He's definitely looking at this as a win-win situation, asking the wealthier people to chip in a little more, spend it on what is clearly the future. And if we don't do it, if we don't invest heavily in renewable energy, our competitors overseas will. They will become more efficient in the long run. None other than Elon Musk. The reason why he decided to go into electric cars, he had an epiphany when he was in high school. He woke up one morning and said, we're going to run out of oil and gas one day. We have to start making electric cars. Okay. By making them more efficient, by figuring out ways to generate the electricity that you're going to put in those batteries, using wind and using solar and other renewable energies, we can clean up the economy and create a lot of high-paying green energy jobs.
Dr. Axelrod, how does Trump's plan compare to Biden's?
Okay, well, with respect to President Trump's plan, he also wants to see more infrastructure. But again, I think the approach is to have the private sector drive it more than the public sector. Again, the idea here is if it's driven by the private sector, the market will, communicate and reinforce what looks like what we really need as compared to, what people in Washington, D.C., think is important. Okay, so that's one take of it. In terms of environmental issues, President Trump supports continuing the extraction and development of fossil fuels. Okay, he's rolling back some of the environment regulations that they just seem to be too much. They're too picky. It's like, okay, you want to protect animals and such like that, but humans are more important. Okay, that's part of the take on it. And again, this is allowing the private sector to be able to take advantage of the resources that we have. And he also doesn't want the U.S. to be held back by agreements like, for example, the Paris climate agreements that other countries may or may not follow. Okay, we don't want to hurt our economy as a whole because of the fact that we're putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. And a lot of this is also driven by, yes, maybe the technology keeps advancing. And if it does, well, we'll have to adapt with it. But today, we need oil and gas, and so does the rest of the world. And as long as we need oil and gas now, we should be producing it. We should be the ones that are taking advantage of the resources that we have. So again, it's about, what do we need to deal with now as compared to what we're imagining is going to happen in the future.
So when it comes to environmental issues, would we both agree, would all three of us agree that Biden's plan focuses more on the environment and looking towards the future, whereas Trump's plan is focusing on the economy now, what we need right now?
I take a little issue with that because there's no question that we've generated thousands and thousands, I don't know the exact numbers, of jobs in renewable energy. So it's very much economy related as well. If you haven't heard of the Gigafactory, it's one of the largest buildings on planet Earth where Tesla is making their batteries. And you can look up the Gigafactory. And that's that's 100% green energy jobs, high paying jobs, right? Building windmills, building solar panels right here in this country. So yeah, I would say Biden's plan is more focused on environment, but very much will also be a benefit to the economy.
But wouldn't some of those jobs come from the fossil fuel industry as well?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the concerns that President Trump has is if we try to push too quickly to go into this Green New Deal, what's going to happen? There'll be less consumption of coal, so there'll be fewer miner jobs. That's really going to impact people that have, not a very high standard of living. Okay, and what are their alternatives going to be? I mean, if you're talking about, for example, in West Virginia, that's a major part of their, their employment. Same thing with oil and gas. It is not an automatic that if they lose their jobs, they're immediately going to be finding jobs in the renewable sector.
There's going to be disruption. However, in 1890 to 1910, when the automobile started getting developed, there weren't people who said, "Oh no, if we keep developing the automobile, everybody in the horse and buggy industry will be put out of jobs." It's part of the natural evolution of technology. Anyway.
What it really comes down to is, what is the focus? Is it about the crises that are right in front of us? Or is it about this world that we're going to create for, 50 years or 100 years from now? And, what you're interested in is where we're going to be in 100 years. You might go a little bit more green. If it's about, how are we going to get through the next 6 months to a year, that's a luxury that some people will feel that we can't afford.
There's definitely concerns on both sides of the aisle, whether it's for the economy or for the environment in general. There's concerns on both sides with that topic. So now that we've discussed that, let's move on to our final topic. And we saved this one for last because it's a big topic. So big that it encompasses 1/6 of the United States economy. And that, of course, is healthcare. So first of all, before we get into any of their plans, why does healthcare encompass 1/6 of the overall U.S. economy?
Well, to answer that is, people on average live to be about 80 years old. It's a little variance in states and a little variance by gender, but you don't get to live to be 80 without a lot of help. Okay. And, it may be just, some pharmaceuticals. Sometimes it's more major intervention. But let's keep in mind, if you go back to the turn of the century, as in the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s, average life expectancy was only around 40 or so. So it costs money to live longer. So that's why healthcare is such a big component of our economy.
Also, one of the things, and this is a very complicated topic. Most people have health insurance. Now we're concerned, and Biden is definitely concerned about providing more coverage for more people. Most people have coverage through their work. Most of the coverage pays most of the expenses. At Montclair State, we have a variety of different plans available to us that unfortunately I've availed myself of with various orthopedic accidents over the last few years. I didn't pay a nickel out of pocket. I didn't hesitate to seek medical care because I knew it wasn't going to cost me anything. I pay premiums for my paychecks but the actual going to the doctor didn't cost me anything. Roughly 85% of this country, between 80 and 85%, has healthcare, has some kind of insurance. They're more likely, from their employer, they're more likely to seek out healthcare because they don't perceive the true cost, which means there's more demand, which drives up the amount of healthcare being consumed.
Right. And Mr. Federman, could you continue on, but now could you speak on Biden's plan?
Okay. All right. The vice president is opposed to Medicare for all, but he wants to create a public option. We are the only first world country that doesn't provide healthcare for everyone. Right now in this country, approximately 15% of the people don't have healthcare. Because of COVID, several million more have been added to that over the last few months. We want to have a plan that everyone can get coverage, that it doesn't have to be tied to your job. He wants to lower Medicare eligibility to the age of 60, create that public option, and spend approximately, again, we're talking about 30 or 40 million Americans out of 325 million who don't currently have insurance. Wants to spend an estimated 750 billion over a decade. So we're talking 75 billion a year, 75 to 100 billion a year, money provided by his increase in taxes that will provide health coverage for almost everyone. There are huge benefits to having health care coverage. By having preventative care, you can save a lot of money in terms of long-term care down the road. People are healthier when you get preventive care. There are a few days off missed from working. And in addition, and this is critical, part of his plan is to protect people with pre-existing conditions, diabetes, miscellaneous other things, so that when you go from job to job, you know you can still get covered because you have access to health care. If you're under some kind of public option, you're going to be covered for those as well. That's it. But in a nutshell, wants to make sure that people are protected with medical coverage, which pays benefits by having a healthier population.
And Dr. Axelrod, in contrast, how does Trump feel about this?
Okay. Before I say this, I want to remind our audience again that, you know, at Feliciano, on our social media, we have, you know, Business Edge podcasts and Feliciano Live on all of these topics, and, you know, you get to spend a lot more time in detail of these. So just as a reminder for people, if you are hungry for a little bit more.
A shameless plug, if you will.
Well, you know, all plugs are shameless. So President Trump's perspective, he would like to see some spending cuts on Medicare and Medicaid. And thank you to Todd for those infographics in the beginning, because it's a reminder that with Medicare and Medicaid, we're spending over, you know, $1 trillion a year. President Trump does not see that as sustainable. Okay, that's a lot of money to be spending. So what's the take there? Okay, it's going to need to be trimmed back, at least somewhat. And his take is that people need to take on more responsibility for their own health care, right? They may need to work longer, right, to be able to afford insurance coverage, again, from companies that provide insurance coverage. Or they may need to make better investments to afford private insurance, okay? Now, one of the things that he likes to see is improved negotiated prices for prescription drugs. And so that will help lower costs as well. And of course, you know, art of the deal, he's very big on being a better negotiator. So he sees a room for improvement there on the negotiation stance.
Louis, I got to just jump in here. Over the last week, I saw President Trump several times. When asked, because a court case is coming up sometime in early November about the Affordable Care Act being challenged, and it's going to be in front of the Supreme Court, and he already got rid of parts of the Affordable Care Act and trying to get rid of the whole thing. And when asked, says, I'm going to replace it with a plan that's better, provides better coverage, and it'll be cheaper. And that's it. You never hear what the plan is, because there is no plan that's cheaper. You can't have more, you can't provide more and have it cost less, right? It was extremely difficult to put together Obamacare in the first place, the Affordable Care Act, and he constantly keeps harping, we're going to replace it with something better that costs less. It's one thing to say it, but for 2 years, the first 2 years he was president, there was a Republican Senate, Republican House, and he was in the White House, and no plan came up. So it's very questionable at best. I understand that he wants to cut massive expenses. That's clearly what his position is.
So you're saying he's all talk, no game in that situation?
Specifically on several things, but specifically when it comes to replacing the Affordable Care Act, 100%.
All right. Thank you very much. And I know I said that was our last topic, but I do want to add one more because I think this is very important as well, especially in today's day and age. And this topic is constantly changing these days. And that, of course, is the topic of stimulus plans. First, we've seen Donald Trump say at some points that he will refuse to negotiate about stimulus plans until after the election and until after he claims his second inauguration. But then he's jumped back on that a little bit, saying that if Nancy Pelosi puts a bill onto his desk about a stimulus plan, he'll sign it right away. And now he's blaming it on Nancy Pelosi. So what is Trump doing on this? Does Trump want a stimulus plan? Does Trump not want a stimulus plan? What's going on with that?
Well, I'm taking Trump's point of view here. It's extremely, the first several stimulus plans, there's more than one. There's been in excess of $2 trillion extra that's been spent replacing money that people weren't spending, and that has helped prop up the economy. In February and March, the stock market was down tremendously. Once the first several stimulus plans were passed, market came roaring back because people were still spending. Now, as people have lost the extra $600 a week, and again, there are still massive parts of the economy that are closed. Live entertainment is closed. Sports is open, but not for people going into the arenas. Wedding venues, things like that. There are large sections of live entertainment that's completely closed and will remain closed for a while. To keep people spending money, the whole concept of stimulus is great. When he specifically said, Louis, as you pointed out, he said he was sick and tired of the negotiating, not going to have anything else to do with it. Stock market dropped between 2 and 3%, literally in 5 minutes. And then he got really scared and said, uh-oh. The next day he came out and said, I want to have something bigger. Right now, I don't know that there are enough Republicans and Democrats together who are willing to pass it because of the politics. Could we use help? Maybe, but right now, it's going to be too difficult. Do I think Trump would like a stimulus plan right now before the election to try and prop up things, make people think he's getting something done? Absolutely think he would like something like that. I'm not sure there's enough Republican support in the Senate. I'm not even sure there's enough Democrat support to hand him what looks like a win with 2 weeks to go to the election.
All right, and Dr. Axelrod?
So from Vice President Biden's perspective, look, continuing to have stimulus is going to be very important. And for many of the points that Todd was bringing up, many people still either don't have jobs, or they don't have the same amount of work that they had before, or they don't have the same salaries, okay? So that's one thing we have to keep in mind. Part of having a stimulus plan is sometimes you've got to spend money when you don't have income coming in so that it doesn't become more expensive in the future. So for example, if you own a home and you're unemployed and the roof needs to be fixed, you spend the money to fix the roof, because if you don't, you're going to ruin the whole house, and then you end up with no house, and then you're in a much worse situation. And that's what the stimulus plan is about. It's making sure people have enough money for food, that they have, they can afford to, live where they are. And so part of the plan is also to limit the amount of evictions, okay? That they can afford health care, because we clearly need more of it, to be able to afford the new methods of educating their children. Okay, they need to be able to have, in many households now, they need to have at least one of their parents stay home to help the kids, do online education. Well, that's a paycheck lost for many families. So in order to make that affordable, they need some more help with the stimulus. So I think that's one of the ways to understand this, okay? We're in the middle of a crisis. We need to get through the crisis. And a stimulus plan that tends to give more money to those who are already wealthy and have a lot of assets misses the point. It needs to go to those that have little, okay, that are struggling to find a job or struggling to get enough work. I would say that, Vice President Biden is very concerned about the people, that are traditional blue collar workers, those that are struggling families, and, what we would call Main Street is compared to Wall Street. And, we need to bail out not just the wealthy, not just the states that support Trump, but to bail out all the states. If we lose the coasts, if you lose New York and New Jersey and California, that is a huge part of the economy that the other states just are not going to be able to make up for.
I think it's important to note that neither Trump nor Biden's plan covers a stimulus package that would include coverage for individuals between the age of 18 and 24 that are still on their parents' health insurance. And I say that as a young individual, and myself and many of my friends and my coworkers and my acquaintances and most students on the campus or just go to school here did not get anything, because if you were under 18, you got $500. Well, your parents received $500 for the kid. If you were over 24 or on your own health insurance, you received that $1,200 unless you were making a certain amount of money. Is it problematic that young people between 18 and 24 are not receiving any stimulus checks? Because I feel of all people, we are the ones that spend so much money.
Todd, do you mind if I go first?
It's classic economics 101.
Yeah.
Give money to people who have less of it. They have a higher marginal propensity to consume, which means if you give them more income, they're more likely to spend it. So the answer is yes, of course. Having said that, the stimulus was surprising. The first several stimulus packages were surprisingly successful because the economy was in free fall, and it stopped the free fall. It really did. It was like catching, the expression on Wall Street, catch a falling knife. They actually caught a falling knife and didn't get hurt and propped it back up again. Were a couple of things missed? Absolutely. Is there too much hesitation now going into the next stimulus plan? Absolutely. Politics on both sides interrupting more stimulus talks.
I think another thing that we have to keep in mind with respect to Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, is that having older people have the resources to be able to retire is essential for moving them out of the workforce so that there is more work available for those at the younger age. And we can't have the older generation competing with the younger generation, especially in the middle of the crisis. Louis, I think you're bringing up a very, very important point about the young generation now. It's leading to a delay in their education. We're starting to see numbers suggesting that there's a 15-16% drop in students starting freshman year in college, countrywide.
So the article today.
But I mean, it's understandable. It's understandable. It's not irrational, but that's going to be a problem. And so when we think about these solutions, it is a whole holistic, feedback loop issue. If older people do not feel comfortable retiring, they're going to hang around longer, and that's going to slow down the 18 to 24 getting into the workplace, and we need them to either get more education or be productive, not only because of what they're producing now, but because that work experience enables them to be more productive sooner. And ultimately, in an economy, it's not about the money, it's about what we produce, right? Because you can have more money, but if you're not producing anymore, your standard of living doesn't go up.
So now that we've discussed all of our topics today, and here's the hard part. We have to, we don't have to, but I'm going to ask you if you have a preference, if you believe, both of you, one economic plan is better than the other. So I don't know who wants to go first, but I want to hear both of your thoughts on that.
I'll go first. I'm not an economist. I play one on TV. I came to academics after 25 years on Wall Street. So I encourage everybody, you can look it up. Goldman Sachs on Biden's plan estimates it will be much stronger for the GDP, much stronger for employment. Look up Moody's, which is the credit service. Moody's analyzed both plans and said, we expect that the Biden plan will generate millions more jobs and more growth to the GDP. Basically, what he wants to do, Biden, is ask wealthier Americans to chip in a little more money and continue spending both on medical, both on health insurance for people who don't have it, Green New Deal infrastructure, renewable energy. And by spending this money, we'll be creating jobs, more jobs, and bringing the economy up. Again, that's the opinion of both Goldman Sachs economists and Moody's economists, both of which came out within the last week's 10 days.
And Dr. Axelrod?
In the short run and in the long run, Vice President Biden's plan tends to, as Todd was pointing out, tends to provide more of the stimulus and the spending. I mean, you can look at, the Fed and Powell. You can look at the Treasury and Mnuchin. They're both arguing that we need to have more fiscal stimulus, okay? This is not to say that there aren't some kernels of truth in Trump's plans that we have to deal with in terms of, how are we going to keep people competitive? How are we going to encourage them to, take risks? But ultimately, one of the big distinctions between the two plans is whether or not we support a regard for each other. And, going forward, we're just going to be more dependent on each other. We're going to have to coordinate our behaviors more, whether we like it or not. And, we either figure out how to be okay with our neighbors, or we're going to end up fighting with our neighbors. And it's going to be less expensive to help each other out than to fight each other. Right. And that's really one of the elements that we don't often take into account when we consider economic plans.
So I'd like to thank you both for your thoughts on that as well. But I'd also like to reiterate to our audience that until that last question, everything that both of our guests here today did, they put a lot of work into today, researching both plans, speaking with each other about the pros and the cons of each plan. So everything up until that last point is straight down the middle facts. So we encourage you to make your own decision on who you believe is the better candidate in terms of the economy and in terms of which candidate would benefit yourself and America as well. So we're not trying to sway anybody with this. We're just trying to present facts so that you can make a better informed decision for yourself. So I'd like to thank you both, Dr. Axelrod and Mr. Federman, for being here today. I know you both put a lot of time and effort into this, and I'd like to thank you one more time for that. It was a pleasure having you on, and I hope to have you both on again.
It was a delight, and more than happy to be a guest of yours again.
Happy to be a guest here and now thinking of new topics for future conversations.
Yeah, and we hope here at the
Let's leave it there.
we hope here at the Feliciano School of Business that we can continue having these conversations. So in order to stay up to date with all of our content, you can follow us on social media. We're on pretty much everything at this point. And as Dr. Axelrod alluded to before, we have podcasts, we have features, we have live segments, and we also have now segments as well. And now we have Feliciano Conversations. So for everybody here at the Feliciano School of Business, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you real soon.